Are you saving too much for retirement? Let's break it down on this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show. Today we're talking about saving too much for retirement, right? Statistically, most people have the opposite problem. They can't save enough. But there is a large subset out there of people who are just saving too much for retirement. They are avid savers, and it's not an issue until it's an issue, right? And I'll get into a little bit about what that might mean. We all are familiar with the concept of balancing, the future security, the future self with present enjoyment, right? There's that YOLO. You only live once. You're kind of living in the present. Little bit of reckless abandon for the future. And what we're talking about is the opposite, right? A constant worry, a constant savings for this future and kind of sacrificing the present, right? And that can become an issue, right? You don't want to sacrifice or put off too many important experiences or memories here in the present for the future because the future is not guaranteed, right? So it's this balancing act. You got to find your balance in between. One thing for sure, you don't want to start sacrificing for the future is your health, right? It does you no good to win the game financially, right? And come out at the end. You saved enough money, you're retirement rich, but you kind of sacrificed your health and your relationships along the way. That might not yield the best results, right? And I think there's a lot of people who, to no fault of their own, you get going in the grind, you get going saving, you get kind of carried away, and before you know it, you look up and you're retirement rich, but other aspects of your life have kind of suffered throughout the way, right? And we all know study after study shows that money, financial issues, is like the primary driver of relationship issues, relationship problems, right, between spouses, and I'm sure it even carries over to friends and family as well. So money can be a big issue, right? And saving too much can create this false sense of scarcity. Or if you're not aligned, right? If you're not aligned with your spouse or with other people about spending habits, it can create these kind of conflicts and these issues. Okay, before I dive into some other stuff, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, you've seen these kind of memes, or I don't know what you call them, right? But these concepts out there. But as it goes, right, when you're young in life, you have no money, you got great health, good energy, and a lot of time, right? But no money. Midlife, you have some money, you got good health, but you have no time, right? Because you're hustling and bustling. And then later in life, you have lots of money, but unfortunately, your health and your energy aren't there, right? So I always like those, thinking about that. There's definitely a dichotomy to it, to where you have to find that balance, strike that balance. And you kind of have to work against this scarcity mindset, right? This, what I call it is fear-based saving, right? And you're always afraid you're not saving enough or you're not keeping up. And you got to fight that scarcity mindset if you fall into this category, right? And like I said at the beginning, statistically, most people don't fall in this category. Statistically, most people are in that YOLO crowd, or, due to maybe job situations or earning situations, they can't save enough, right? But we're talking about the subset that's saving too much. And if you are one of these people, you probably know you are. Let's talk about some rules of thumbs, right, around retirement savings. I don't like rules of thumbs. I think they're interesting, but not very useful. I think life and pretty much everything is very nuanced. Everybody is uniquely different. I know in a lot of ways, if you take a 10,000-foot view, we are all alike. But when you get into the minutia of, our lives, our families, our health, our savings, it's all very different. It's hard to compare apples to apples, but we'll go through some of these rules of thumbs. And the first one I want to bring up is the one where you hear this a lot. You should be saving 20 to 25% of your gross income for savings, for retirement. That's the rule of thumb, 20 to 25% of your gross income. And I don't see anything inherently wrong with that, right? It's a good target. It's okay to come in higher at times and maybe lower at other times, but it's a good target to strive for. The Fidelity savings factors. So Fidelity kind of had this chart that I looked at, and it showed how much salary you should have saved by a given age. Okay, and it goes in 5-year increments, right? So at age 30, you should have 1 time your salary saved. Age 35, 2 times. And it kind of keeps incrementally going up. By age 50, you should have 6 times of your salary saved. Age 60, 8 times of your salary saved. And according to this rule of thumb, age 67, you should have 10 times of your salary saved. Now, again, it's interesting to think about. It gives you a target, but it's just so bad at actually being applicable across a wide swath of people, right? Case in point, if what if your salary is massively high and you're one of these people who's really frugal and great at living underneath your means, then this really doesn't, you would blow it out of the water, right? Or vice versa, right? You don't make very much and you spend a lot, but there's savings, in other aspects of your life. I don't know, through real estate, inheriting money, or whatever it might be. It just doesn't do a good job of diving into all the nuances that could be going on in somebody's financial life. But those are the rule of thumbs. I think it's worth noting. It's worth, kind of taking a look at. And if you can't come up with a target for yourself, then it provides sort of a target for you to kind of manipulate and use and make your own. So some of the things that kind of are secondary or tertiary effects of saving too much is liquidity issues, right? Not enough cash, but big retirement accounts. So if you're stuffing all this money into your retirement accounts and you're saving for this grand retirement that you have in your head, but your car gets totaled and you can't afford to replace it, or you have a medical emergency that cost you, an absorbent amount of money that you weren't planning for, and now you're stressed out to the max, but you have these big retirement accounts, well, then you have a liquidity issue, right? And maybe you're saving too much and you need to have a little more cash or some sort of short-term, investment that's liquid, some reserve in place, so that way you're not stressed out. Because you're kind of, creating this false sense of financial stress by running things really lean with your cash and your emergency fund. And I personally fall into this category at times, right? I like to run things really lean and get stuff as much as I can at this point in my life into my retirement accounts, but it can cause undue stress, right? And you don't, like I said, if you can avoid undue stress, then you might as well take those actions to do it. So those are some liquidity issues around it. Saving too much for retirement. I work mostly with retirees, right? I do retirement planning. It's just where I feel is the best place in somebody's financial life, where things can get a little convoluted and complicated when you're talking distribution planning. And you have estate planning, you have a lot of tax planning opportunities, you got Social Security decisions to make. And I find it's the most value rich area for me to provide advice to people as a financial advisor. So I work in retirement space. And one thing I find is those who are great savers and who accumulate, some amount of wealth throughout their life, a lot of times have challenges spending the money in retirement, because you get so good at saving. You work this savings muscle throughout your whole life. You get kind of institutionalized. You can't break the cycle, right? And it comes time to spend, you just can't do it. There's like some guilt around spending money that you've saved, even if you can afford it, right? And I just circle back to the goal isn't the money, right? The money is the tool. The goal is to use money wisely across your life, right? As they say, it does you no good to be the richest person in a graveyard, right? And you can't take it with you. One other thing about retirement and spending money in retirement, like I said, oftentimes these really good savers have a hard time spending in retirement. But it's important to kind of circle back to, I touched on this before. When you look at a retirement life cycle, it kind of goes in three phases, as they say. You have the go-go phase, you have the slow-go phase, and you have the no-go phase, right? It's these three phases of retirement. Go-go phase, you retire, you hit the gates running, you're excited. You start taking all these trips, you're spending some money. And then you kind of tire out. You get tired of sitting in TSA lines and all this other stuff, and you kind of go through this slow go where you're maybe, you kind of settled into this lifestyle in retirement. You're not going out and spending as much, and then your no go is obviously, unfortunately, we're all going to get there. We get to an age where we just slow down dramatically, and we're not taking trips and all that kind of stuff. The reason I bring that up is when we're talking about spending challenges in retirement is you don't want to fall prey to this fear-based scarcity mindset and miss your go-go phase, right? And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can't live like the YOLO, right? You only live once and just go reckless abandon. You got to find that balance. But my concern is for those who are avid savers and have trouble spending in retirement, you don't want to miss the years when you're vibrant and healthy enough to go do what you want to do. Okay, so let's move on here. Another reason why you might save too much is you're misjudging your retirement needs. A lot of people overestimate, especially if you're going to be debt free, right? People often pay off mortgages, and you're kind of no car loans, no student loans. You're debt free. People often overestimate their retirement needs, and their expenses go down in retirement. Not for everybody, but for most people. Now, I will say the caveat to this is healthcare and long-term care and other aging expenses are really the wild card there. Not everyone will face huge bills with that kind of stuff, but it is a wild card, and you do need to kind of set up some sort of buffer fund to account for the possibility of those expenses. But I think a lot of people overestimate, and it's better to overestimate than to underestimate, right? Like I said at the start, most people can't save enough for retirement, so it's kind of a good problem to be on the overestimating side of retirement planning. But like I said earlier, with the go-go phase, you just don't want to defer experiences and joy now for a time later that's not guaranteed. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so most of us set up some financial goals or benchmarks. And if you don't, maybe you should start, right? So this is how you kind of navigate the overestimating or underestimating your retirement needs. Set up some benchmarks, some goals. Okay, start to think through, okay, how much should I be saving each year to get to this goal, and what might that look like, and how much do I really need in retirement? And these may all change, right? Year over year. I mean, a lot of this stuff is fluid, but you still need to go through this process of setting up financial goals, setting up benchmarks. And then if you reach these goals, don't move the goalpost. Reassess some things, right? Take a look at the here and now and seeing if those dollars can be spent maybe in a better way in the here and now instead of moving the goalposts, right? And we'll talk about that later. So let's say even if you fall short on a benchmark, right? You're not making it. You're not meeting your savings goals. Even then, you still want to be careful about sacrificing family time, health, and relationships now, right? I mean, if money is, we're talking the financial aspect of that, right? If you're chasing dollars and you're sacrificing these other important things, family time, health, and relationships, to chase an arbitrary number, that might not be the best approach. Maybe it is, and I'm not telling anybody what to do, right? I'm just offering some food for thought. I'm not saying I have it all figured out, but it's just something to consider, right? So let's talk now. Let's move over. I don't know if you folks are familiar with Nick Offerman. He's on a bunch of TV shows. He was in Parks and Rec. He was Ron Swanson, right? He did a comedy special, several years back. I don't know. It's probably 10 years back, and it was entitled "Paddle Your Own Canoe." And I like this concept. We know this kind of metaphor, right? What is the one? He beats to his own drum, or whatever it is, right? But the reason I bring it up is there's comparison culture. I would say more so now than ever before in human history, given the implications of social media and the widespread use of TV and advertising. There's this huge comparison culture, and you kind of can get caught up right on this rat race wheel where we feel like we're kind of in this constant competition. It's a race to the end. It's there's the FIRE movement out there, which I think the FIRE movement is great, but it can be misconstrued into this, constant race to the end where you're sacrificing everything to get to this point. And that's not how everybody does FIRE. And I think there's a lot of great things about the FIRE movement. I'm just pointing out the misconstrued or the negative aspects to the FIRE movement. Financial independence, retire early, right? You're saving every penny. You're sacrificing everything now. You're going to get to where you're going. And I get it, hustle, the hustle culture. I fall prey to it a lot, but yeah, you kind of have to push back on it at times and just kind of reflect, take inventory, and it's okay to enjoy the ride. It's okay to not be optimized, right? We're not listening. We can't all wake up every morning, jump in a cold plunge and look at light like Huberman says, right? Or whatever we got to do. It's okay not to be optimized. It's okay to just enjoy the ride. Just do the best you can. Now, comparison culture can make that really hard because you can feel like you're falling behind, especially when they put out these numbers of, by this age, this amount, this and that. Or you can feel like you're winning, which you would think if you feel like you're winning, maybe you pull up. But I think today, if you feel like you're winning, you go harder, right? I always think about, historically, there used to be a leisure class, they would call it, right? Where, the extremely wealthy, they kind of lived in these leisure lives, right? At country clubs and yacht clubs, and it was take it easy. I feel like more and more now, the extremely wealthy are pushing harder and harder, right? They're getting after it. And, it just kind of, it's not a bad thing. I'm a big believer in capitalism overall. I think it leads to a lot of good things, but it's important to take time, self-reflect, and not get caught up in this comparison culture. All right. So two things to close that out really is, one, I want to talk about the concept of enough. And last one, I want to leave you with a question from George Kinder. So the concept of enough, and I love this story. Kurt Vonnegut tells this story, and I just find it's great. It's about lifestyle creep. It's about enough, and I'll just read it off to you here. At a party given by a billionaire on Shelter Island, Kurt Vonnegut informs his pal, Joseph Heller, that their host, a hedge fund manager, had made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his widely popular novel Catch-22 over its whole history. Heller responds, "Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough. Enough." I was stunned by the simple eloquence of that word. Stunned for two reasons. First, because I have been given so much in my own life. And second, because Joseph Heller couldn't have been more accurate. For a critical element of our society, including many of the wealthiest and most powerful among us, there seems to be no limit today on what enough entails. I just find that really interesting. I think it sums it up. Enough is something we all have to decide for ourselves, and it's real easy to keep moving the goalpost. I know if you look at where you are, I mean, if a lot of us reflect on where we are now compared to where we thought we'd be 20 years ago, I think we're mostly in a good spot, right? I mean, unless you're thinking you're going to be in the NBA or something like that. But I think most of us are doing pretty well when you reflect and take that kind of vantage point. Morgan Housel, he's the author of The Psychology of Money. Great book, really great book. He defines enough as a mindset for financial and personal well-being, where you recognize when an insatiable appetite for more leads to regret, and instead prioritizing things like freedom, happiness, and security. It involves understanding your own definition of fulfillment, being aware of social media's influence on expectations, and knowing when to stop taking risks that could harm your invaluable relationships and peace of mind. Right? So I think it's a great way to define enough. And we all just have to define enough for ourselves. And a lot of times, even if we define enough, we have to have the wherewithal to kind of stand in place, calm our minds, and really take a look at where we are. Okay, last thing to end this episode here. It's just the whole episode is just about food for thought when it comes to, are we saving too much for retirement? And the last one, I'm going to leave you with a question from George Kinder. George Kinder is recognized as a life planning pioneer. Life planning is kind of, I wouldn't say a subset. It's a maybe a sister aspect to financial planning. I don't do so much of it. It's kind of more about what does money mean to you, and a lot of it gets into more of the feeling side of things. Me myself, I'm just not that person, and what I do is more just, I'm big into relationships, but I'm just don't get real touchy feely in my retirement planning practice. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but okay. So his question is, I want you to imagine that you are financially secure, that you have enough money to take care of your needs now and in the future. The question is, how would you live your life? What would you do with the money? Would you change anything? Let yourself go. Don't hold back your dreams. Describe a life that is complete and that is richly yours. All right, so I think that about wraps it up here. If there's anything you'd like me to talk about on the show going forward, email it over to aloha@hawaiiretirementshow.com, and we'll catch everyone on the next one.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Katita and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial. For Jason Katita, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration.